And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are, in my humble opinion, the 10 most challenging commanders to build around. Okay, now, first of all, little addendum here. There are certain commanders, legendary creatures, and I've talked about this before, like Jedit Ojanin, who I consider to be the worst card ever printed, because it's not doing anything. There are some just straight up vanilla legendary creatures, particularly from the original Legend set, where they're just not doing anything, right? So there's really nothing to build around there, right? When I talk about challenging to build around, I'm talking about these are commanders where if you're actually trying to build a deck around this commander, because of what that commander is doing in this format, it can be really, really difficult if you're actually trying to build around it, right? If you just want to have a vanilla creature as your commander for whatever reason, okay, great. But this list is the commanders that for me, I think are particularly difficult to build around because of what they're specifically doing. And some of these I have actually gotten requests for in my Underwhelming Commanders video, and I'm just like, oh man, wouldn't even know what to do with that, right? But most certainly my hat is off to anyone that has tackled any of these extremely challenging commanders, because there are some out there. So I'm going to start off at number 10 with actually a pair of commanders, Tivdar of Thorne and Rashida Scalebane, and I talked about both of these in my 3 cards that the commander format needs video, where I talked about making a colorless option for changing creature types, because there are several commanders in the format that specifically want to deal with certain creature types, and that can be tough if you can't do that, right? Blue deals with creature types really, really well. Other than that, you're in a real tough bind if you want to be doing that. And of course, both of these are dealing with specific creature types. Tivdar of Thorne, when it enters the battlefield, you can destroy target goblin. So if your opponents aren't playing goblins, that doesn't really do anything. I guess you still have 2/2 first strike protection from red. So I guess you could build around the protection from red, but it just really sucks that you can't build around the goblin part, which is really the best part for that commander, in my opinion. Rashida Scalebane, same thing. This one even more so because it only just has the one ability, right? Tap, destroy target attacking or blocking dragon. You gain life equal to its power. And if your opponents aren't playing dragons, that's not really going to do much. Again, it's not impossible. Rashida Scalebane currently has 5 decks on EDH Rec. Tivdar of Thorne has 24, so there are people tackling these. I applaud you for doing so. It's incredibly challenging, right? If you happen to be in a play group where you have lots of buddies that play goblin or dragon decks, this might be worth it, but you are extremely limited on your options for what you're actually going to do in your deck because you are relying entirely or almost entirely on your opponent's creature types, right? Similarly, coming in at number 9, Hibis of the Scale, 3 red, Viashino Shaman 3/4. You may choose not to untap Hibis of the Scale during your untap step, and that's because you can tap Hibis to gain control of target dragon for as long as you control Hibis and it remains tapped. So again, relying entirely on what your opponents are doing, and there is, to my knowledge, no way in red to change creature types. I think there might be one changeling spell that does that, right? And so again, there are a few options here, but they're so limited. And when you're in that particular color, now getting that card is going to be even harder. You don't tutor very well in red. There's just a lot of things working against you here. Again, there is 5 decks on EDH Rec for Hibis of the Scale, and I applaud the people that are tackling it. Maybe, again, there are people who are just playing a lot against their opponent's Dragon decks. I don't know. Certainly, it is incredibly challenging because of that limiting creature type there. Next up, we got Irini Singier. Speaking of relying on what your opponents are doing, 2 black, Vampire Dwarf, which is interesting. That's a very unique creature type, so I guess that maybe could be something you build around. 2/2, green enchantment spells and white enchantment spells cost 2 more to cast. I mean, that is just, it's not a useless ability at all. Green and white are popular colors in the format, and it's possible your opponents will be casting enchantment spells, but as far as building around that, I don't see any way to do that. I'm trying to think, you're relying entirely on your opponents, right? You're in mono black here. Is there any way to build around this ability? I don't think that there is, right? Again, if you just want to build a mono black Vampire Dwarf tribal deck or something, I guess you could do that. But as far as actually trying to build around your commander's ability, that is a really tough one. Because again, you're relying entirely on your opponents to be casting green and white enchantment spells. And then on top of all that, you're also just going to be annoying your opponents by doing so, which makes matters even worse. So this is a really tough one, no question. Next up, we got another another 2-for-1, and this is what I refer to as the horrible twins, Braid and Morn. They came out in the same set, Weatherlight. They're both 3 black. Braid is a 5/5 with trample, and Morn is a 5/4 with flying, and they both have cumulative upkeep, pay 1 life, which of course is really, really bad. So just as a creature, like I'm going to build a Morinfen deck, and it's going to be a Voltron deck, and I attack with, I mean, okay, you could do that. Obviously, there are way better options if you're going to build a mono black Voltron deck. The cumulative upkeep part is the tough one, right? And there are some things you can do with it. Again, I'm trying to think of ways that we can use this, ways that we can actually build around what our commander's doing. I guess you can build around the fact that your commander has flying or trample, but the cumulative upkeep is sort of the unique part. Now, Font of Agonies is the obvious include in both of these, right? There is something that will actually work here. You're paying the life, it's going to put counters on your Font of Agonies, and you can do so. You're in mono black, so you can tutor for it, but that's literally 1 card in your entire deck that you can be building around with these commanders, which makes it extremely challenging. The other thing, though, I will say that you could possibly do is, because cumulative upkeep now deals with age counters, you are actually putting counters on your commanders. So you could do like a Feign the Broker or Power Conduit where you remove the counters to do stuff. So I don't know, maybe I'm coming up with stuff here. This isn't as bad. It is really bad though, right? You have to remember, on top of the fact that you're trying to find advantage to the cumulative upkeep thing, you are also paying the life, right? So the longer your commander stays around, the more life you're going to be losing, which kind of sucks for just like a 5/5 or a 5/4 creature. Coming in at number 6, we got Arashi, the Sky Asunder. 3 green, spirit, 5/5. Has a couple of abilities here. Pay X in a green, tap Arashi, the Sky Asunder, deals X damage to target creature with flying. And has channel. Pay X, and 2 green, discard Arashi. It deals X damage to each creature with flying. Again, unless you are in a very specific play group where your opponents like to play lots of dragon decks, angel decks, Pegasus, I don't know, whatever, lots of flying creatures, spirit tribal, this is just really tough to build around. I mean, first of all, the channel is tough to build around because in order to discard your commander, it has to be in your hand, which means you have a very limited amount of opportunities to do that. Command Beacon, Road of Return are the 2 that come to mind. So I'm going to put all the effort into getting those cards just so I can get my commander into my hand, just so I can discard it to deal damage to each creature with flying. Is that going to be worth all the work you're putting in? Again, if your opponents are all playing flying tribal decks, sure, it would be worth it. That is a lot of work for a flying board wipe, though, a ton of work. But even if you ignore the channel part, the actual ability of your commander, if you put it on the battlefield, is also really, really bad. And again, even if your opponents are playing dragon or angel tribal or something, this is a whole lot of mana just to kill 1 creature with flying. If your opponent has a creature with 5 toughness, you're going to have to pay 6 total mana and tap your commander to deal 5 damage to that creature. That's a whole lot of work you got to go into just to kill a creature with flying. This is a really tough build around. Again, my only suggestion here is Predator Flagship, which you can pay 2 mana to give a creature flying until end of turn, but then Predator Flagship already has that ability stapled on it where you can pay 5 and tap to destroy target creature with flying. So you might be better off just using the Predator Flagship, right? You don't even need your commander's ability there. Definitely a very challenging build for sure. Next up, we have Eudaro, Wandering Monster. 5 red, dinosaur turtle, 8/8. Trample and haste. Has cycling, 1 and a red. And when you cycle Eudaro, Wandering Monster, shuffle it into your library from your graveyard. If you cycled a card named Eudaro, Wandering Monster 4 or more times this game, put it onto the battlefield from your graveyard instead. So that's a very interesting ability. Too bad you're never going to actually use it. I don't know if anyone has managed to pull this off. Again, there are 22 decks on EDH Rec for this guy, and you could just go giant stompy turtle Voltron deck with this for sure. 8/8 trample haste for 7 is pretty good. If that's what you're doing, that's fine. I just think building around that actual ability would be really nice, and you can't do that, right? You have to, again, get your commander into your hand before you can even cycle it. So now I have to go through all of the trouble of getting my command beacon, which in mono red is incredibly difficult. There's just so many hoops to jump through to get your commander into your hand so that you can cycle it, and then it's just going to get shuffled into your library. and then somehow you have to get it out of your library back into your head. Like, man, I don't know if anyone's ever pulled this off. Congratulations if you have. I would imagine the 22 people who have put this deck together on EDH Rec are not doing that cycling at all. It would be really nice if they could just, for this commander alone, say you can cycle from the command zone. They're not going to do that. It would be really cool if they could do that. Maybe this would be too good if they did that. I don't know. But again, as far as actually building around what your commander is doing, this is obviously incredibly challenging. And I thought it was interesting that they even came out with this commander. I mean, it's obviously not old. It came out in Yokora, which was a huge commander set, but yet they came out with this commander that doesn't really work in commander at all. So, which I'm not going to complain about. I don't expect them to make every legendary creature work really well in commander. It is kind of funny that they did that though. Coming in at number 4, again, we have a pair of commanders, both from Legends, both Dimir commanders, Riven Turnbull and Princess Lucrezia. So Princess Lucrezia, 3 blue, black, human wizard, 5/4, and you tap it to add a blue. Riven Turnbull is 5 blue and a black, human advisor, 5/7, and you tap to add a black. So we have 2 commanders in Dimir colors that are really, really bad mana dorks, like really bad. And again, what exactly are you doing with this deck? I don't know what I would do with it, right? This is essentially a list of these commanders are so difficult to build around that I don't even want to tackle it. Like, I wouldn't know what to do. Your commander's a really bad mana dork. Like, why do you need to tap to add 1 black mana on turn 7? Like, how do you build around that? I'm not going to go through all the trouble of getting my commander out just so I can tap it for black mana, especially when it's a 5/7. I would much rather just attack with it, right? 5/7 is pretty decent sized. So again, like the ability that I'm trying to build around just makes absolutely no sense as far as the deck building goes. If you're actually trying to build around what your commander's doing, it just makes no sense to have a commander that is a mana dork that costs so much mana. There just is no way you're ever going to want to use that, right? Very, very challenging to build that deck. And honestly, I have no idea what direction you would go with it. Coming in at number 3, we have Daughter of Autumn. And this is one that I actually had a patron of mine ask me about. That's why I added it to this list. And I was like, man, that is a tough one for sure. 2 green, Avatar, 2/4. You can pay a white. The next 1 damage that would be dealt to target white creature this turn is dealt to Daughter of Autumn instead. So this is definitely an ability that it's doing something. You definitely can build around it, but it's so incredibly challenging because the amount of hoops you have to jump through to actually get something out of it doesn't really seem worth it to me. So obviously this is a white and green commander because it does have that white pip there. You can only redirect the damage from a white creature. So the creature has to be white. I guess it doesn't have to be yours. It can be your opponent's creatures, but now you're relying on our opponents, and I'm not even sure why you would do that. You're going to redirect the damage to Daughter of Autumn. So you want damage to be dealt to your commander. Now, of course, there are ways you can build around that. There are a few very limited ways, but even if you did manage to build around the fact that you want your commander to be dealt damage, you first have to have your white creatures having damage dealt to them, right? So we have so much hoops we have to jump through, and the payoff is so minimal. I mean, yes, you could just make a deck with a whole lot of white creatures or white and green creatures, right? Because the 2 color creatures will be white as well. You attack with them. If they get blocked, I guess you can redirect some of the damage to your commander. I guess that's not bad. You're gonna have to be leaving a lot of white mana open all the time, right? Because this is 1 white mana for 1 damage. So if your creature takes 3 damage and you want to redirect it all to Daughter of Autumn, that's 3 white mana you gotta have open. Again, so many obstacles here to make this even a reasonably good commander. Incredibly challenging. Again, my hat is off to anyone that actually has this deck. I applaud you. For me, it's just a bridge too far, I think. Coming in at number 2, we have Yokora the Prisoner. 2 black, demon spirit, 5/5. When Yokora the Prisoner leaves the battlefield, sacrifice all non-ogre creatures you control. So this is sort of a bygone era that this goes back to, where having a 4 mana 5/5 was considered to be really, really good, even if it was legendary. And so you needed to have a drawback, right? And this is a pretty brutal drawback. And then on top of that, in Commander, having a 4 mana 5/5 is like, who cares? Nobody's going to be scared of that, right? That's not a big deal at all. Even if it's your commander, that's not really that scary. I guess you could go the Voltron route with here, but it's just not good as a Voltron commander. In fact, I would probably rather have Braid as a Voltron commander, because at least it's got trample. This guy's terrible this way. And again, if I'm trying to build around the ability, I mean, obviously you can do that. You can build a deck where you actually want to sacrifice all your creatures, I guess. I don't know. Like I'm struggling to figure out what the best route for this would be. You can't donate it to your opponents, right? That would be funny if you had a commander that you just wanted your opponents to have because it's so bad, but there is no donate effects in mono black, so you can't do that. Maybe that's another thing that the format needs, is a colorless option for donating your own crappy commander, which would be funny. Then you could kill your own commander and force your opponent to sacrifice all their non-ogre creatures. Obviously, if all of your creatures are ogres, that's a way to go with this, I guess. But again, is it worth it? Is it worth it to have a 4-mana 5/5 and be forced to have your entire team only be ogres? There are a decent amount of ogres, I guess, if you want to do mono black ogre tribal. There are a decent amount in the format. But again, I just think there's probably a lot better options. Like, your commander's not an ogre. Your commander's a demon and a spirit, right? So I don't know if you want to go that route. Again, there are 14 decks out there that people are playing this. You could go the route of, I want to sacrifice my team. But again, I just think there are way better options for sacrificing your creatures where you actually get an advantage out of it. You can just put an alter effect or some effect where when my whole team gets sacrificed, I'm actually getting a benefit out of it rather than I'm just having to sacrifice my whole team. Really challenging to build around here for sure. But coming in at number 1 is Chromium. And, I was looking at the original Elder Dragons. And for those who don't know, this is how the format was started, right? These original Elder Dragon series. And of course, it was originally called Elder Dragon Highlander, EDH. The Elder Dragons were supposed to be your commanders. And then it eventually got turned into any legendary creature. The original series, they're not great. They are 8 mana, right? So Chromium, for example, 2, white, white, blue, blue, black, black. That's a heck of a casting cost. Elder Dragon 7/7 with flying and Rampage 2. And has at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay Esper. So this isn't bad. It is a 7/7 flying Rampage 2. Again, though, if I'm actually trying to build this commander, because this is one that I was actually thinking about because I had a request for it. And again, some of the other Elder Dragons are not great build arounds as well. This one I think is the worst. And the reason why I think it's the worst is because the Rampage 2 and the flying are such a terrible match. So if we look at, say, Palladium Moors, for example, which is the Naya version of this, it has flying and trample. That's a good match. Flying and trample are good. That actually makes a decent Voltron commander, which I imagine is what you're going to be doing there, right? By the way, they're all 7/7s, which is why commander damage is 21, because it's 3 hits from a 7-power creature or the original Elder Dragons, right? That's why it's 21. So I imagine in the beginning, there was a lot of Voltron decks. There's a lot of that going on, right? Flying and Rampage 2 are a bad mix because flying is evasion and Rampage 2, you want your creatures to be blocked. So for those who haven't seen it, because it is a very old ability, whenever this creature becomes blocked, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn for each creature blocking it beyond the first. So if I attack with my Chromium, my opponent needs to block with at least 2 creatures before the Rampage does anything, which means my opponent has to have at least 2 flying creatures. So for me, the flying and the Rampage actually make it worse. If I have a Rampage creature, I want it to be blocked, right? First of all, I want to give it trample. Trample works really good with Rampage, where the more creatures that block, sort of the worse it gets for my opponent because my creature keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If they just chump with one creature, it doesn't do anything. The Rampage does literal nothing unless they block with more than one creature. So on my commander, that Rampage 2 is almost useless. It might as well not even be there because they have to block with at least 2 flying creatures. And if they do, then my commander becomes a 9/9 and I'll probably kill their creatures, but I'm not going to get through for any damage because my commander doesn't have trample. Now, of course, I can give my commander trample. It's a little bit harder in Esper colors. You can do it. There are equipment that do that. But again, now I'm jumping through a whole bunch of hoops just to try to make the Rampage usable. And I have to rely on my opponents to have flying creatures in order for them to block, right? If I go through all the hoops of, I'm going to put something that gives trample on my commander, and I'm going to put something that gives maybe like a Nemesis Mask where I force my opponents to block. Well, guess what? If they don't have flying creatures, they can't block at all. So now I've jumped through all those hoops for absolutely nothing. So, I guess this is not that bad, but for me, I just thought the flying and the Rampage 2 were just such a horrible match. Those two don't go together. Rampage 2 and evasion are complete polar opposites of each other, where you have one where you don't want your creature to be blocked and the other where you do want your creature to be blocked, right? So it doesn't really work. Again, I suppose it might be a better ability if your opponents have flying decks, right? This might be a situation where maybe you want your opponents to have flying creatures. And I guess if you were doing a glass half full sort of scenario, people will say, oh, well, if your opponents don't have flying creatures, then you're good because you just get in for damage. And if they do have flying creatures, now you get to use the rampage too. So it's all upside. I mean, I guess you could look at it that way. But again, for me, I'm trying to build around these commanders' abilities, right? That's what I'm looking at. As far as really challenging commanders to build around, I want to build around what my commander is doing. Yes, you could just very easily take any really bad creature, stick a bunch of equipment on it and call it a Voltron deck. Sure, but I like to actually build around what my commander is doing, what their abilities are. And all of the commanders on this list are really challenging to build around. And for someone that builds a lot of decks with a lot of underwhelming commanders, I think that's saying something. If you think I'm wrong, if you think that there are some commanders in here that are pretty good and maybe you have one of these decks, if you do, please comment below and let me know exactly what you're doing with that deck and how you're going about it. I would love to hear about it. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.